Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time around we are again going to be extending the biome-based procedural generation. And so there's a couple of things that I want to be doing with this. And these changes are all about getting things set up so that we can do chunk-based terrain generation, being able to easily spawn in additional sections of terrain and things like that. So what I'm going to be doing is a couple of main things. One is packaging up all of the generation data into a single class. That's going to make it a lot easier for us extending it in the future as well, adding in additional modifiers, things like that. We're also going to change how we work with random numbers so that that's very carefully, very precisely controlled, and so that we can also be setting a seed to begin with for that. So let's dive on in. So starting point with all of this is I'm going to head over to our code. So essentially what I want to do is, and this is why I've got the base versions of all of the modifiers, painters, things like that open, is I want to change this where they pass in all of this data. So I want to really thin down that. Now the biome index and biome does change a lot, but all of the rest of these are actually the same sets of data. And so what we end up doing is we end up actually retrieving those multiple times, which is not really ideal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get started with this by I'm going to create a class, public class generation data, and it's going to hold all of that data that we actually are working with, essentially all of the temporary data. So we can see a bunch of ones that we've already got here. And so anything here that's temporary ones, those are actually all going to go into generation data. Now, we're going to be creating a lot of errors with doing this, and that's okay. That's actually going to be how we identify the areas that need to be updated. So all of these are just going to be public. So we're going to start with breaking these. And then, okay, that's good. Well, we know there's a whole bunch of other things to add in here, and how I want to figure out which ones to add in is I want to take a look at these execute functions. And the biome index here and the biome, that is something that does vary quite a bit with what's being passed in. So I want to keep those, but everything else should go into here. So I'm just grabbing them and I just want to see, okay, which ones here have I not currently got? Well, be handy to have the ProcGen manager, and actually I will, for a bunch of these, I will just actually do this. Map resolution we don't currently have. Height map we also don't currently have. Our height map scale is another one. Slope map we do already have, so we can skip adding that one in. But the alpha maps, we don't have that. Alpha map resolution we also don't have. But the biome map we do, so we don't need to add that one in. So that's good. Now all of these are going to become public as well. So that looks good. And I'll reorder this a little bit just for putting things where it makes the most sense. So I think things like resolutions and sizes of stuff like that, I'm going to put those up here. These are very much temporary things, so those will go down there. They're not used by a lot of stuff. So, okay, that's good. So what that would mean for this is this changes to look like ProcGen Manager generation data. That. So, okay, that's one done. It's going to introduce a whole bunch of errors. That's fine. Let's look at things like our object placer. So it does have the biome ones as well. It's got a couple of different ones. So we'll bring those over here as well and look at what potential ones we might need to add in. So the config, that's one that would be handy to have in there. Our object root also would be handy to have in there. Map resolution we've got, height map we've got, scales, all of the rest of those ones we already have. So that's good. I'm going to reorganize those again a little bit. So what we'll find is we just go through with each one of these and look to see if there is anything new. So ProcGen Manager, generation data, like that. So let's see, do we have anything new with this? Well, the config we've already got passed in. All of the rest are all ones we've already got. So that's good. The detail painter, we want to check its execute function as well. And the fact that it's highlighting that suggests to me we've probably already got all of those. But just in case, we'll bring that over here and check. So, okay, manager map resolution height map we've got. Alpha maps and alpha map resolution we've got. The detail layer maps are new though. So we don't have that. We don't have the detail map or max details per patch. So we did find a couple of new ones. One advantage with this as well is it's going to make it so that in future with other modifiers, to add in a new bit of data that it's storing is going to be very, very simple. Because to add in a new set of data, it's just adding it into that class. We don't need to go and modify the signature for a lot of functions. So it lessens our maintenance overhead, which is a really valuable thing. So config, all of those we've already got. So that's good. We've switched everything over to this now. Now this will be introducing a lot of errors, and that's okay. That's kind of intentional. Why I've done it this way is so that we can work by fixing those errors, and through fixing those errors, that's how we'll know when we're done. So, okay. This will make it super easy in future for extending things, which is great. And I can close all of these base ones now. But all of the things based off of them are going to be very grumpy. We can see from all of the red here, this is quite grumpy, and that's okay. So we can start to get more of this fixed up now. So working data. Or I might just call it data. So we're going to start to fix up the different things. And where we can begin with, obviously, is our actual setting up here for the initial data, which, okay, things like the map resolution, all of those ones, those all sit in data. So we can do data is a new generation data. All of these should end up being data dot. So we have the map resolution, alpha, detail, max details per patch. So that's good. So we're storing that bit of information. There's a bunch of other things that we need to cache in there as well, or info. So we have things like our data manager, which is ourself, our config. So the config is our global, I think we just have it called config. Yep. So we've got that stored in there, which is good. We need the object root. So data object root is going to be the target terrain transform. So we're also changing slightly where we're placing things, because some stuff was parented under the ProcGen manager. This is changing it, so we're now parenting things under the terrain, which is going to make a fair bit more sense there in terms of working with that. So, okay. Making good progress with this. While the biome generation, things like of that, we used to, with these, pass in all of the particular things. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to just use that data that we've already got. This here as well, where we were just working with that, we're going to change transform to data object root. So just each of the cases where we've got this, we want to just change that over. Does mean that in the first time we run this, it is going to leave behind a bunch of ones, but we can easily manually select that and clear those out. Just means that now it's going to be putting them in the correct location. So all of these ones that took parameters before, I'm going to get rid of them taking parameters, because everything is just packaged up in that data structure, and that's what we want to actually maintain. So, okay, generating the texture mapping. Well, this changes to data dot, and a lot of what we'll find with a lot of the ones is it just changes to data dot. And if you're using things like Visual Studio 2022, it's autocomplete actually makes the process of updating this pretty quick, because it's generally fairly good at spotting ones that need to be updated. So what we're generally looking for is we're just going to go through all the errors in ProcGen Manager and update that. Now, for the moment, we're keeping ProcGen Manager fairly simple in that it is just being used only to sort of store with that generation data, just storing data. We're not adding any functions to it. But over time, that absolutely is something that we could do. So, okay, this is one of the first areas where we can see we need to start making some changes. So this would become data.biomemap and data.biomestrengths. This is going to be data map resolution. And what I will do is we could also move these if we wanted to. So these are things that we could move up to the very beginning, but I think it's okay with them being created here. Our execute, well, that changes to just be data. So it simplifies a lot of these things. Height map modification, all of that goes away. This goes to data.heightmap. And then these will change to, and we can see that autocomplete kicking in. Our execute here, these change to just simply data. Our setup here, we can see simplifies things a lot, although in that case it's gone a little bit overboard. It shouldn't be replacing all of that. So while the autocomplete is generally pretty good, it does go a little bit off at times, which is fine. What it's trying to do, this is something that a human can easily make mistakes with this. So it's something where it does a pretty good job. It does a pretty good job in terms of figuring out what things to change, and it does tend to get better over time as you're making those changes, but it is just something to be mindful of, that its suggestions are generally good, but it does at times get it wrong. So you do just want to be careful with checking what it's actually suggesting, so you're not making changes that are incorrect. It's very, very easy these days for autocomplete to introduce a whole bunch of issues. And again, like of that, it's trying to autocomplete for fixing up part of it because it doesn't understand yet all of the changes that it could make. But that's all right. We can go through and we update these. Now stuff like of this. Now our height map, we've already retrieved our height map and we've done the modification to it. So I'm not actually going to do anything with that. I'm going to just grab our alpha maps here. So that is something I do change as part of this, that previously we retrieved the height map a lot. And even things like the alpha maps, we retrieved those things quite a bit. So we're actually removing a bunch of processing here with this, which is really good, because we're only having to retrieve each of those things once. So that saves on quite a bit of processing. So like the height map modification, we get the height map, then we're modifying it all throughout this, setting everything, same with the slope map, and then afterwards we just apply those and then we can refer back to them. So things here like the object placement, well, we get rid of the resolution. We also get rid of this height map alpha maps, we don't retrieve those things again. So it saves us quite a bit of time, quite a bit of, it's something that, especially if we're trying to generate this at runtime, anything we can save in terms of things like memory allocation, stuff like of that makes a big difference. So here again, so that's already 2 cases of retrieving both the height and alpha maps that we were able to completely remove. So that's a big, big, big gain there. So, okay, we can see with this would change to data detail map resolution. A lot of these ones, it's a very similar change. And when it gets to doing the actual modifiers, I'll do a couple of ones. I'll run through the specific changes just so we see those. But for a bunch of the stuff, I actually will just sort of skip to the other side of it. So the detail layer maps, previously we weren't actually keeping a copy of those. So I'm going to actually change it so that we are, because that's going to give us access to that in all of the rest of the code, which is handy. So we've got those. So that's pretty good. We've likely cleaned out, looks like, all of the errors in ProcGen Manager. The test will be going back to Unity and making sure it's happy. Now it's going to be grumpy about a lot of things, but what we're looking for is that there is nothing in the ProcGen Manager. And we can see there is nothing in the ProcGen Manager, which is good. So let's look at the process in updating a couple of these. And this is generally our setup, is we go through and we change these to, this will be ProcGen Manager, our generation data, and our generation data. Now we can see these are obviously going to have areas that it's complaining about. That's fine. We'll get to fixing those in a second, because we want to also change this one as well. So slightly different process for each one, but we can see, okay, well, generation, data, map resolution. Our config here becomes generation data config. Map resolution, we can see what that changes to. So most of the updating process is quite straightforward, and for the most part, the suggested automatic changes are actually going to be pretty on point. So they're going to generally be pretty good. Some ones it's going to get a little bit confused about, and that's okay. Just means that some ones end up being a little bit more of a manual update, but even still, the few ones where we can go and actually do the autocomplete, it does speed up the process quite a bit. I suspect this because it's in a #f, that makes it get a little bit more confused about what's actually happening, which that's fine. We have our generation data, biome map, and generation data config. So even the autocomplete fails a little bit there with that, but that's okay. So that's the Veroni-based one updated, Ooze-based, and this becomes one where it's like we want to look and see, okay, well, what's going to make the most sense? Do I pass in the generation data? Do I pass in something else? It really is going to be on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, the easiest change here is going to be to do like of this, and we just change these individual ones. Generation data, biome strengths. And the rest looks all good. So now if we go back to Unity, we should see we're down to 17 errors. So it's going to be the same process for fixing each of these other individual ones. So how I am going to go about it, and as I said, I am going to skip through the ahead, so through the magic of editing, I will in a moment jump ahead to the point where this is all updated. But I'll show you and talk through sort of, I guess, my process of how I'm going about doing this if you're wanting to be manually doing this yourself. So what I'm doing is, these are already, with how the errors are generating, is generally organized by type. But I'm working on and fixing each one grouped based upon the type. The reason for doing that is that it means that the autocomplete suggestions generally work a lot better because it generally is looking at recent things that you're doing, and that makes it a little bit easier. Also means it can do things like easily copy and paste the settings between these. Most of the rest of these, the executes are going to look exactly the same because they're just checking the biome. Now, there will be a couple of little edge cases we do run into, and that's okay. There will be a couple of errors that we run into that we have to fix, and that's fine. So the first thing I would do in each case is update that signature for it, and then that's where I then start going and, okay, let's do one at a time. And one at a time going through and updating each of these, because what I'll find is the actual autocomplete will, after I've done a few ones, will start to be able to fill in the correct ones for things. And the more you do, the better it tends to get at that. You do, as I said, just want to double check and make sure it's always processing the correct one, because it does get confused at times. But generally, after you've done one or two ones, it gets pretty good at providing a correct one. So max details per patch. So with having updated one of these fully, what I should find when I go to then do another one is it's able to autocomplete better, and it starts to do more complex ones. So like if this gets updating that entire line. Similar with here, so it makes it a lot quicker. Sometimes it does still require a little bit of prompting, but for the most part, it gets pretty quick with updating the different ones. So we can see that's the detail painter, and then these ends up becoming just a case of we're doing tab for the most part. Again, being careful, just paying attention to what it's updating to make sure that it is updating the correct thing. And we'll always hit ones like this where it hasn't seen us update it recently, so it doesn't know what to do. But that's the detail painters updated. So that same process, and we always, after we update a set, we come back to Unity, so we can see which ones are working, which ones aren't. And I would say, again, working through them in groups. So I'm going to do things like the object placer, and I would do the texture painters. I'll do those all in one go. And again, I'll just show the very initial little bit, and then through the wonders of editing, I will skip ahead to it being completed. So first thing to do again is update this, and all of these will end up being exactly the same. So they'll all have this same process, to the extent we're going to actually just paste that in for all of these, because that way then I'll see the actual errors I need to fix, and that will make it a fair bit easier. And we can see why this is going to then in future make sort of the updating, the extending of this so much easier. We just add things into a class. We don't need to go and update signatures. So, as I mentioned, through the wonders of editing, I'm now about to skip ahead to the point in time where all of these are actually fixed. So if you're wanting to go and make a bunch of updates and go through that process yourself, now is the time to sort of put it on pause and then be able to come back to when it's been updated. Okay, so with the wonders of editing, we're back at the point where those errors have all been fixed. So the compile errors have all been fixed. And I have done a commit with that midpoint version. Now, that doesn't mean that this is necessarily going to work. And I'm pretty confident that when I go and run this, there's going to be a whole bunch of things that break. Now, one of the things I'm going to do to begin with is, because I know they won't manually get cleared out, I'm going to, automatically get cleared out now that they'll spawn under the terrain. So I've manually cleared those. So now I'm going to try and regenerate it. I expect things to break. And we can see a bunch of things that do break, which is to be expected. So this is an error that we'll get in a bunch of things, saying that it's these ones that don't work at a global level. That only work at a global level. They don't work at a per biome level. So this is where what I would do is, so this isn't doing anything with biomes, anything like of that. So what I would check is, rather than biome map not being null, because biome map is going to be getting populated very, very early on, what I could do is check if biome is actually being supplied. Now we will have a couple of other ones that are like this. So what I can do is just do a search to see if I've got that anywhere else. So texture painters smoothing is another one. So I can go and check the biome if that's not equal to null. So that's good. Now, obviously, a lot of other things went wrong, and that's okay, because they could be due to some of the other things we had happening there. So, okay, let's regenerate the world again and see if we still get those same ones. So we can see a lot of the errors are in relation to position, and there's a lot of them. Lots and lots of things for position. And we can see the terrain is well and truly not really there. So if we take a look, previously we were doing a lot of manually passing in things like the height map scale. We don't do that anymore, but we also forgot to populate that actual scale. So we need our target terrain, terrain data, height map scale. So if we do that, and now we go and do a regenerate. So we're not seeing any errors so far, so that's promising. It seems to have generated everything normally, and everything is parented under the terrain. So that's good. We now have this working to actually generate our world, and we've got it converted over to using that structure or class. We wouldn't want to use a struct for this. We've got our class with all this data in it, so that's really, really good. Now we want to do the next part, the final part of setting up the random number side of things. So what I want to do is I want to actually very tightly control how random numbers get generated and used for the terrain generation. To the extent that I'm going to actually set up in here a system random RN generator, and the reason I'm using the system one is because this allows me to easily have my own separate one that only the generation data uses. So then, okay, we want to be able to have a way to provide a seed for it. So we'll give the option for a seed. And then what I will do is RN generator is a new system random, and we give it that seed. So that's good. Then I'm going to set up a field here. Int seed. And we'll just pass that in. Now, we pretty much, our random number generation falls into two functions that we need, an integer and a float one. So I'm going to have public int, and we'll just call this random. And I'm going to follow the same naming convention that Unity's one does. So min inclusive and max exclusive. And then all we need to do is we return our RN generator and a next. And with this, we can give it our min inclusive and our max exclusive. Then for the float version, we want float min inclusive and float max exclusive. Now this one, it doesn't have a one that's going to give us back a float. So what we do is we're going to return a mathf loop from min, and that actually should be max inclusive, to max inclusive, and we use our RN generator next double, but we cast that to a float like that. So that gives us a random number generation function that we can now use, and we want to replace all of our random ranges with this. So first thing I'm going to do is do a search for anywhere where we're doing random, kind of random dot anything actually. So there'll be a bunch of ones that we do this with. So all of these should change to generation data. And then initially, I just want to make these changes, and then we'll find out what further code fixes we need to do. But essentially, everywhere where there is a random range, changes to this. Do the same thing. So that one's updated. So our start intensity here. So we want to get to a point where, and we only have 22 of them, which is not too bad. But we want to replace anything using the unity random with R1, because that way we have tight control over it. And it means we can still use the unity random for things that are essentially cosmetic, things that don't affect the generation can use it. But for stuff that is going to affect the generation, we have it all go through our new setup. We can already see a bunch of ones generating errors, which is fine. That's okay. We'll come along and fix those up soon enough. We just want to get the initial set of all of these changes in so we can double check and make sure that we've replaced all of these. And then this is going to make it really, really easy for us generating different chunks, having different seeds that we can also be using, and having that be something that could be made available to the user for working with, which is always cool to be able to do that. So those are updated, and the last one here. So then I'm just going to rerun that search, and we should find nothing. Now we will have a lot of errors, which is okay. It's only 14, it's not too bad. It's going to be a similar fix for a lot of these ones. So we're not providing things like the generation data here. So, okay, we change these over so that now we are. And then that means our low resolution one changes to that. Our ones where we had config change to generation data config. So it makes it just a little bit easier. Now we might have, and there are going to be ones like of this that don't change over nicely. So we see our spawn individual biome also needs that same setup. That'll make some things happier, other things less happy. It's kind of the standard thing when you're fixing errors. Some changes you make, you clean up a lot of errors. Other changes you make then go and cause additional ones. So that looks okay for that. We can see if we have no more ones with the ooze-based, which that's correct. We have no more with that, so that's good. So what I'll do is I'm going to, just to clean up a lot of this stuff, we'll get rid of anything but this. So, okay, let's look at the next set of ones. So the island one has a lot of ones where it's complaining. So we do the same sort of fix. That. Things like this change over. Sometimes it gets it correct. Other times not so much. That's good. That's fixed a lot of ones. So in most cases, it's not going to be too many changes that we need to make. As we can see, we're already down to only 5 errors left. And all of those are in the one thing. But as will likely happen, we may find that fixing it in one introduces then a whole bunch of other ones, which is fine. Things like our spawn object here, we can see that that also then needs our ProcChan manager, generation data, which the object root we can grab now from generation data. So that changes this a little bit. And again, it struggles a bit with updating for things that are inside conditionals like that. Okay, that's better. But we still need to go and then update this. So we might find that this one in particular barrels on to cause a bunch of other things to break. But in theory, it may be free of errors, but unfortunately not. So we know that needs to change. And that should mean we have one last one here that we update. And with that, what we should find is if I put in a seed of 1, 2, 3, 4, regenerate the world. So with this, we've got a building over here, and we can see it's set in front of a big mountain. So let's change that seed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Completely different. And what I'll do once it's finished generating is I'm then going to check, okay, if I go back to 1, 2, 3, 4 and regenerate it, I'm expecting to see that large mountain with the building in front of it, which we can see it's already started to do that. So our seed is working. So the last final little thing that I will add in, just because it's a really handy thing for us to have when we've set up to have a seed here, is serialize field will randomize seed every time, which I'm going to set to true. So what I will do is here, I want to set up working seed, which is going to default to that. And then this will change to working seed. And then if we are trying to randomize the seed every time. So what we do here, firstly, well, working seed, I can just do random range 0. Actually, what I can do is int.min value to int max value, like that. Now, if we're in the editor, we might want to actually persist that change. So what I'm going to do is a check for if Unity editor and if Unity editor, and if the application is not playing. So if it's not playing, which that is, no, it's not a function. So that's right, it's lowercase. So if it's not playing, then I want to do undo record object, this randomize seed, and just go and update that seed. So I only want to do it if it's not playing. So what I should now have is that seed, which will be displayed because I've got that enabled. When I go and regenerate the world, I can see it's randomized it. So each time it'll generate it differently, but if we need to lock it, then we can easily lock it to a particular one. So with these set of changes, we now have something where all of our transient data, all of our working data as we're doing the terrain generation is packaged up into one thing. That has the advantage that we're retrieving stuff less, which is good for performance. Also has the advantage that if we need to add additional data there, it's very quick and easy for us to do that. So we've lowered our maintenance overhead for our code significantly. The cost of extending something is much, much, much lower now, and that's really good. So we've made things like that a lot easier. We've also added in the seed support there, so that's going to make it easier to be able to let users control the seed, for example, or for us to reproduce a particular terrain. And we've also then, with doing all of this, set ourselves up really nicely for being able to spawn in additional terrains and be able to have those be targeted separately for the generation, which is really handy. So dive on in and experiment with this, see what things you might want to add to that, try different seeds, see what you can come up with there with that. Thanks folks, hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck on a like and subscribe, it really helps out, it's really appreciated. If you're looking for the code for the project, that code is available up on GitHub. You can freely use that in any of your own projects, commercial or non-commercial ones. I have linked that in the description below. And if you're trying to track down other videos, I have a searchable video archive, which is a link to that in the description also. If you've got any questions, chuck in a comment below. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there's a link to that in the description also. But until next time, bye.